let's give Sean just a wonderful, warm welcome. Sean McConnell.
Let me just start out. I have an ulterior motive. I figured by speaking up, it's going to be more difficult for the government to disappear me, should they get that far. So I want people to know who I am, so if I vanish, people know I'm gone. But as Dan said, I started my transition 3 years ago. But I want to start off with a brief history, very brief, because we could be here for days if we went over all of it. Ancient civilizations around the world, as far back as we have records, have recorded stories of people who we today probably would have considered transgender. It's not new. We've been here forever. They've got a skeleton, I believe, in Egypt in 12,000 BCE that they dug up. I believe that particular skeleton was genetically male, but had the accoutrements of a female. So, and it didn't just happen in Egypt. Yeah, they've been finding in the Nordic countries, Vikings, skeletons that for decades were thought to be male because they were buried with swords, and they went back and did genetic testing and went, they're women. Kind of blows our theories right out of the water, doesn't it? And then, Thailand has, to this day, a culture that I wouldn't necessarily say they accept them anymore, but it's a tradition to have a third gender, along with Arabia in the 7th century. In African societies, there were third genders recognized in many of the tribes. Same with the North American indigenous tribes, the Navajo and Zuni specifically. Ancient Greece and Rome and the Byzantine Empire had priests who probably today would be considered transgender. They wore women's clothing, they acted as women, some even castrated themselves and wanted to be women. And then we've got the Roman emperor, and somebody's going to have to help me with his name. Or should I say her name? That works for me. He married several women, but he wanted to be called a woman. He wanted to wear women's clothing. He wanted to be a woman. And so there are some museums now who are labeling her as transgender. And then we've got the really more interesting people. Dr. James Berry, fascinating person. He was born Margaret Ann, grew up as a female, but then he wanted to go to medical school. Couldn't go to medical school as a woman, so he transitioned. And while a lot of people transition to have careers such as that, in private they would often go back to their sex assigned at birth. Barry didn't. Barry continued, even in private, to live as a man. And they didn't find out until he died that he was a woman. Really fascinating guy. Weewa, who is a member of the Zuni tribe in the United States. He was a spiritual leader in his tribes. He befriended, or I should say she befriended, some of the people who were working with the tribes trying to preserve their culture, and they really liked her. And they took her to Washington, D.C., and she met the president, and she hobnobbed with Congress, and they didn't know that she was born a man. Albert Cashier, aka Jenny Hodgers, changed gender to fight in the Civil War. Not uncommon again. But Albert continued to live as a man after the war. And he wasn't discovered to be born a female until, I believe he broke his leg. And he had to go to the doctor. And that outed him. And then we've got Mr. Carl M. Bayer. He was one of the first men to have surgery. And then he gained full recognition with a new birth certificate after his surgery. And that was in 1907. All of these people have fascinating stories. Alan Hart was a doctor, and Alan was the one who first started using x-rays, I believe, to diagnose tuberculosis. But he was born Edna. But even as a kid, he wanted to wear the boys' clothes, play the boys' games. You have Magnus Hirschfeld, who was a gay, I believe he was a psychologist in Germany. And he was hearing the stories of the transgender people in Berlin in the late 1920s, early 1930s. And he actually opened the first, basically, LGBTQ clinic. And his clinic is where the first gender transformation surgeries were performed. And the first woman known to have survived her surgery was thought to have been killed by the Nazis. But I found out just recently they tracked her down and she survived. Somehow she got out. And she lived, I believe, into her 70s. And then this is probably one of the women that a lot of people may have heard about, Christine Jorgensen. Christine fought in World War II. And then when he came back, he transitioned. And he went away, I believe, to Sweden and had his surgery. And then he came back as Miss Christine Jorgensen and made the news. And she lived until 1989. Now I've got the science and medicine. I've got a short video here that can explain this way better than I can, so. This is the standards of care for transgender people. It lays out the basically requirements for every step. And this one is based on decades of evidence-based practice. They have, it's from, I believe they're doctors, psychologists, medical professionals from all over the world who get together and debate strongly how best to help transgender people transition or provide the care that they need. This standard from WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, their goal is to maximize overall health and well-being and self-fulfillment of transgender people. And this version, version 8, is the first one that was developed using an evidence-based approach. It's 260 pages long. It's available online if you would like to read it. It can be eye-opening, or You can go online to many other places and just ask, what does a person under the age of 16 who wants to transition from male to female, what do they need? What do they go through? Who do they see? And now we're going to get into my personal story. I was born at the end of the 70s in Nebraska, mooning the doctor. I was breech, and the nurse who delivered me said the advantage to being breech was that we can tell the sex of the baby before they're born. So the nurse confidently told my parents they were having a boy. Needless to say, they were a little shocked when the doctor said, "It's a girl." I've always wanted to go back and find that nurse and tell her she was right. I developed as a normal kid. I played games. I hit all my milestones. Strong, healthy, for the most part, happy. But, I knew I was a little different. About, I think I was probably 5. I was playing house with my friends. My friends wanted to be moms. I wanted to be the dad. My friends were playing with Barbies. I preferred to play with Ken. Or G.I. Joes. Really liked the G.I. Joes. I knew I was different, but, I wanted to be in the Cub Scouts, but at that point, they didn't let girls in Cub Scouts, so I became a brownie. My mom started the troop for me because there wasn't one. And I continued to grow. And then puberty hit. And it was almost too much. My body started to change in ways I was very uncomfortable with. And I didn't know what was wrong. And I didn't know how to tell anyone how I felt. So I kept it inside and spent a lot of time in and out of hospitals. And then I was in high school, and I heard about Brandon Tina and his murder, which happened a couple hours south of where I was living. It was the first time I knew there was anybody else in the world who even felt like I did. It also made me realize that I couldn't tell anybody because it wasn't safe. So I just continued on the way I was, keeping everything inside. Eventually I graduated from high school, still didn't understand, and I never thought I'd graduate from high school. I didn't think I'd survive. I figured somebody would find out and that would be the end. But I made it, and I went on to college, continued learning, still didn't know how to explain how I felt to anyone. And then around 2000 was the first time I heard the word transgender and actually met a transgender person, and it clicked. It was like, oh, okay, I get it. I'd been in therapy for a long time, so I talked to my therapist about it, and at that time, the diagnosis was gender identity disorder. They were still treating it as something that needed to be fixed. So it was a disorder. Got my diagnosis, still living in Nebraska in the early 2000s, not really a safe place. And there wasn't anything I could do, so I went back in the closet for 20 years. And just continued to live my life, but I wasn't really living, I was surviving. And then June of 2020, came across a YouTube video by Dr. Paula Stoll Williams entitled, "I've lived as a man and a woman, here's what I learned." Really funny. She's hilarious. In her it's a TED Talk. In her TED Talk, at the beginning, she says, "The call towards authenticity has all the subtlety of a smoke alarm." She wasn't kidding. And then at the end, "The call towards authenticity is sacred, it's holy, and it's for the greater good." And I watched that, and I realized if I was going to be truly happy and thrive, I needed to do something. So I went online that day, and I found out that the University of Iowa has an LGBTQ clinic, and I called. And I was lucky. I called in June. I was able to get the first appointment in August because somebody had canceled that day. Otherwise, it was going to be October or November before I could get in. So it's like, I'll take it. So I had a couple of months to talk to people and let them know what was happening, what was going to happen. And I did a lot of research. Luckily, the University of Iowa's webpage, their hospital webpage for the LGBT clinic, has a lot of resources. And so I talked to my therapist, knowing that if I was going to get on testosterone, which is what I knew I needed to do, I was going to need a letter from him. So we talked about it, and I didn't have the letter in hand, but he was writing it before I made it to my appointment. So I was able to quickly get that started. I set up the appointment with the nurse to learn how to inject my testosterone, and I got it. And I have been injecting myself with testosterone once a week for the last 3 years. And it has been amazing. But when I went into that appointment, I knew what I wanted. I knew what I needed. I'd done the research, and I talked to or found support groups online, asked questions, talked to people, and most importantly, I talked to my family, and they were supportive, which was amazing. Because every doctor I saw for any point in my transition, one of their questions was, how supportive is your family? Because if your family's not supportive, you're going to have a really tough time. So I was ready when I went to my appointment. And then I had my first appointment August 11th with Dr. Nicely. We talked about my history, how long I had known that I felt different. You know, I told her the stories about, you know, wanting to be the dad and wanting, you know, playing with the G.I. Joes and you know, we talked about all that. It wasn't a walk-in, I want testosterone, here's your prescription, walk out. I think it was like an hour-long appointment. And I still they needed the copy of the letter before I could make my appointment with the nurse to learn how to do testosterone. There are some clinics for adults now that go with, I forget what they call it. They tell you these are the risks. If you sign on the dotted line, yes, I understand, they will write a prescription for your hormones that way. Only for adults. And they have, on the sheet that you sign, it explains the risks, it explains the side effects, it explains everything. Informed consent, that's what it is. And even with all of this, I still had, these are the side effects, these are the risks, sign on the bottom line. And the side effects they talk about, a lot of those are similar side effects that men have just because they're men, or women have because they're women. So it's really not that different for a cis person of the gender that you are transitioning into. I wish they'd given me, these are the risks of estrogen. It's like, can I opt out of that? Thanks. It's like, hormone blockers at puberty would have been a lifesaver. Would have been great. And then when I left my appointment, they gave me handouts with the laws in Iowa, how to change my identity documents, where to get help. I think I had 4 or 5 different handouts when I walked out to make sure that I had what I needed. And then about a week later, I was able to get my first testosterone shot. This was one of the things that all of my support groups recommended, was at least getting your voice before and taking pictures and videos periodically to see how things change.
Hi, my name is Kelly McConnell, and this is my first day taking testosterone. The date is August 26th of 2022. So here's to the beginning of my journey.
These are videos too.
Hey, it's Kelly McConnell, and this is week 6 on testosterone. It's October 8th, 2022. I haven't noticed a whole lot of changes, except my voice has dropped. So, keep going. Okay, it's me, Kelly McConnell. Today is Saturday, October 22nd, and this is, let's see, I've been on T for 2 months now. So, that went rather quickly.
The voice changed pretty fast, and I had never felt so whole as I did after I started taking testosterone. But that wasn't quite enough. I knew that I wasn't going to be happy without top surgery. I was large enough that I couldn't hide it, and I do not like tight clothes. And I tried a binder, didn't quite work for me. I even tried tape, and that worked better, but still wasn't enough. So I knew I was going to need another letter, so I started talking to my therapist and talked to my doctor about getting a referral to a plastic surgeon. And I got my letter from my therapist, went to my doctor's appointment, and she said, okay. I had, the day of my surgery, I was nervous, not of the surgery. I was so excited, I could not wait. I was nervous because I had heard so many stories of you show up at a surgery center and last minute, the doctor decides they're not gonna do it. The surgery center says, sorry, we're not gonna allow this to happen here. Insurance companies go, changed our mind, sorry. So until I actually got in the operating room, it was still like, is this really going to happen? And that's the only thing I was nervous about. I had no nerves whatsoever about the surgery. It was like, it couldn't happen fast enough. It's like, after the first appointment, when the drains came out, and I got to take the binder off for the first time, it was like, wow. It was like the first time I was able to look in a mirror and actually see who in my head I'd always been. You can probably tell by I don't know how drugged I was in this one, but I was so happy. Yeah. It's like, it's something I'd been dreaming about for decades, and finally it happened. So I continue with my testosterone shots. Changes are slower now, but they're still happening. I'm losing my hair, but I'm gaining my facial hair. It's starting to fill out. So yeah, I'm less slowly now. I mean, I look in the mirror and I see the person I always dreamt I was. You know, as a kid dreaming, I was always a boy in my dreams. You know, I was never a girl. So now I actually look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. So, you know, I spent 43 years playing a part that wasn't me. So now the next, hopefully, half of my life will be spent discovering who Sean really is and becoming a whole person instead of a two-dimensional character. And I am so happy now. So much happier. So yeah, that's what I got.